And you say, well, God, this Nichols guy, now he's getting a little crazy. He's bringing up anything. Do you know that the derivation of impeachment goes back to the 14th century in Great Britain? And the first impeachments were against members of the inner circle of Charles I. The Good Parliament of 1387 impeached these gentlemen for the failure of King Charles's administration to respond to the Black Plague. The fact of the matter is that there is no offense more impeachable, no offense more in the great tradition of impeachment, more serious than a failure to respond to the immediate needs of those with the least among you. A president, a king, swears an oath to serve the people, not to be their master, but their servant. And when George Bush sat around playing guitar and raising campaign dollars rather than responding to the death and destruction in New Orleans, that man committed an impeachable offense. So now you're saying, wow, that Nichols guy even brought Katrina in. That is fabulous. And you're thinking, and he says, I want his book. It makes a fine holiday gift, among other things. But I would be dishonest, and while I am not at all averse to being dishonest in most settings, I feel in the pulpit there are dangers. You know, I mean, Bush doesn't seem to be afraid of lightning striking, but I am. And so I have to tell you that I didn't come up with these ideas. I wish I had. The concept of impeachment has deep, deep roots. It goes back to the Scottish Highlands, when rebels against the British Crown would gather. They borrowed a word from the French, empêcher, to impede the powerful. It referred to the attaching of chains to the leg, to impede. And they spoke of a movement of empêcher against the king. It was the original challenge to monarchy, the original challenge to illegitimate authority. When the founders of the American experiment revolted against King George, they borrowed this term, empêcher. There were very few things of Great Britain that they borrowed whole and wanted to take in completely, but impeachment they did want to bring across that pond. And they understood wholly why and when you would impeach. They also understood the importance of impeachment. No less a figure than George Mason, the author of the Bill of Rights, said that no power in the Constitution is of more importance than impeachment itself. For if we do not include the power to impeach, then we make every other protection in the document irrelevant. Because if you cannot remove a president, not at the next election as the Colorado ACLU might suggest, but at the next possible moment, then you have ceded your liberty until that election. You have said that the president is a king for 4 years. A king for 4 years. Understand that phrase. I wish that I had come up with it, but a gentleman farmer little recalled named Thomas Jefferson suggested the phrase. He said that is why we must have the power to impeach, because we must assure, after our revolution, after all of the blood that was sacrificed to free this land from the British Crown, that never again would an American bow down to a king, so we must have the power to impeach our president so that the president might never be a king. Now, think, well, these are the wonderful thoughts of the founding of the Republic. How lovely. But of course, that's ancient history. I'm sure it wasn't remembered long after 1776 or 1787. But you know, the interesting thing is that in the fundamental building years of the American experiment, impeachment was a live instrument of the Constitution and the Republic. The first impeachment of a president was not of Andrew Johnson in the post-Civil War era. It was actually of John Tyler in 1842. Congress held 2 votes on whether to impeach Tyler. People thought of impeachment as a viable and useful tool, and they also understood what was meant by high crimes and misdemeanors. It wasn't a complicated concept. It didn't mean like felonies and things like that. The term high crimes and misdemeanors was placed in the Constitution because they wanted the broadest definition imaginable. They wanted people to understand that citizens would define impeachable offenses via the House of Representatives, their representatives, that they didn't have to go look for a law book. Impeachment is not a legal action. It is a political action. It is not a search for a crime. It is a search for evidence that a president and a vice president have violated the oath of office that requires them to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Impeachment is merely the requirement of observation of and respect for the Constitution. Do you believe that George Bush and Dick Cheney have respected the Constitution? If you do not, then you must impeach. It is not an open question. Now, in the 1840s, America was involved in the most immoral war prior to the war in Iraq. It's not well remembered in our history, but the most immoral war prior to the war in Iraq was the Mexican War of the 1840s. It was initiated by President James K. Polk, a slaveholder, for the purpose of expanding the slave power. The world was abandoning human bondage. There was a recognition of its immorality, and country after country was banning slavery. Polk saw this threat coming to the North American continent, and so he conspired with his political allies to invade the sovereign nation of Mexico, which had itself banned slavery, for the purpose of seizing territory below the Mason-Dixon line, carving it up, declaring it states, and ensuring that forever the United States would have a pro-slavery majority. In the election of 1846, a young lawyer ran for Congress on an anti-war ticket. He fancied himself the Dennis Kucinich of his day. He was a militant foe of Polk's war and of the slave power. He arrived in Washington determined to expose Polk's conspiracy. And he went each day to the floor of the House of Representatives, and in the time set aside for members of Congress to raise issues, he put forward what he referred to as the spot resolution. He said, President Polk, you have said that we have attacked Mexico, invaded its land, because Americans were attacked by Mexicans. I demand that you show me the spot on which a single drop of American blood was shed by a Mexican before we attacked that country. And if you cannot do so, I demand that you surrender your office because you have lied about the reasons for entering into an imperial war. Now, this young man became angrier and angrier with an illegal and immoral presidency. And so he forged an alliance with the oldest member of the House of Representatives, the former President of the United States, John Quincy Adams, who had returned to Congress for the sole purpose of challenging the slave power. And they began a process of seeking to censure President Polk, attaching to each war spending resolution, as well as resolutions awarding medals to those who had served in the war, articles of censure against the president, saying that while we will honor those who have served, we must never honor those who led us into an illegal and immoral war. And when even that did not force the end of the war, they began to speak openly of the need to impeach and remove the President of the United States. The young congressman's law partner sent him a letter saying, "My friend, while I respect and love you, I cannot accept your criticism of the president in a time of war. Troops are in the field. We must support the troops, and in so doing, we must support their commander-in-chief. The young congressman wrote back to his law partner, and he said this: allow a president to invade a neighboring nation whenever he shall deem it necessary to repel an invasion, and you allow him to do so whenever he may choose to say he deems it necessary for such purpose, and you allow him to make war at pleasure. Study to see if you can fix any limit on his power in this respect after you have given so much as you propose. If today he should choose to say he thinks it necessary to invade Canada to prevent the British from invading us, how could we stop him? You may say to him, I see no probability of a British invasion, but he will say to you, be silent, I see it if you don't. The provision of the Constitution giving the war-making power to Congress was dictated, as I understand it, by the following reasons. Kings had always been involving and impoverishing their people in wars, pretending generally, if not always, that the good of the people was the object of the war. This, our Constitutional Convention understood to be the most oppressive of all kingly oppressions. And they resolved in that document to so frame its wording that no man should hold the power of bringing this oppression upon us. Should I respect your suggestion that I might not criticize a president in a time of war, I would make that president a king, and I was not elected to serve a king. Sincerely, Abraham Lincoln. Now, I am told by some of my friends in Congress that it is romantic to speak of Lincoln and Jefferson and Mason and Madison. It is romantic to be so attached to the Constitution of this republic. A Constitution which, I might remind you, makes no mention of corporations, makes no mention of political parties, makes no mention of caucuses or primaries or conventions or any of the other procedures by which we select a president, makes no mention of any organized religion, but makes 6 separate mentions of impeachment. You know, the founders didn't worry about us figuring out how to worship. They didn't worry about us figuring out how to do business. They didn't worry about us figuring out how to choose a president and vice president. But they worried like hell about us forgetting that we had the power to remove a president and a vice president when they committed crimes against the Constitution. That's why they put those 6 references in there. Now, there are those who say, oh, well, you know, that was the past. This is now. And they also say, you know, maybe there was an argument for impeaching George Bush and Dick Cheney at some point along the way, but it's really late in the game now. Why, we've got an election coming up soon. Can't you just be entertained by that? And, you know, and I really like this argument in many ways, because as somebody who was not the best, you know, I'm not the best driver in the world. I've actually had some speeding tickets and things, and I was thinking perhaps I could argue, well, you know, it's after 8 o'clock. It's late in the night. I'm almost home, officer. Could you just not give me the ticket? I could see immense possibilities of extending this to many crimes. But, you know, the Constitution didn't say that. It didn't say, well, if the president commits high crimes and misdemeanors late in his tenure, well, that's okay. You know, if you don't catch them till late in the game, that's okay. You know what? This interesting thing, the founders kind of understood this. Two things. One, you don't impeach in a time of peace and prosperity. You don't impeach when everything's going great. You also don't impeach at the start. You wait till they've screwed up. You wait till they've squandered peace and prosperity. You wait till they've got us stuck in a quagmire in Iraq and on the verge of a recession. That's when you start to think seriously about getting rid of them. And you know what? We're there. We have reached the impeachable moment. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Don't tell me it is too late. These gentlemen have another 12 and a half, 13 months to go. Do you understand how much damage Dick Cheney can do in more than a year? And they talk about all these timelines. I get so frustrated. Congress talking, oh, maybe instead of immediate withdrawal from Iraq, we'll do a timeline, right? Well, let me tell you about a timeline. Every 10 minutes in Iraq, an innocent Iraqi civilian is killed. Every 10 minutes. In a war that George Bush says will not end for so long as he is the President of the United States. Every 10 hours in Iraq, an American soldier is killed in a war that George Bush and Dick Cheney say will not end for so long as they occupy the White House. Every 10 days, $2 billion are removed from the U.S. Treasury and deposited into the accounts of Blackwater and Halliburton in a war that George Bush and former Halliburton CEO Dick Cheney say will not end for so long as they occupy the White House of the United States. 10 minutes, 10 hours, 10 days. And there are those who would dare to say we do not have the time, that it is too late to impeach George Bush and Dick Cheney. Why, I think 10 hours, 10 minutes, 10 hours, 10 days, that seems like a very good timeline to me. 10 minutes to bring the charges, 10 hours for the hearings, 10 days of debate, they're out of there. And you know, impeachment can happen that fast. There's people who tell you, oh, impeachment, it's such an arduous and painful process. You know, it only is if you're making up something about a blue dress. You know, I mean, if you got some serious high crimes and misdemeanors, you can really move this thing along pretty quick. And I will ask you this question as I close and turn you over to the much more responsible and wise David Swanson. I ask you to seriously think about this when somebody tells you it's too late. Think about this above anything else I've told you. Do you really think it is too late to hold George Bush and Dick Cheney to account? Is it too late for the Iraqi mother who will bury her child before this speech is done? Is it too late for the American mother who will bury her child before this night is done? Is it too late for the American without health care, without education, without housing, for the people in New Orleans, the victims of Katrina, who still await George Bush's promise to rebuild their city? Is it too late for them and the $2 billion each 10 days that could be going to do that? Is it too late? I don't think it's too late. And I don't think it's too late for the American experiment. You know, the presidency of the United States is the most powerful office on the planet, and it is now the most pathological office on the planet. For so long as we allow presidents to finish their terms without being held to account for their high crimes and misdemeanors, the powers and the pathologies of that office will grow. And I say to you, I say to you, when George Bush chopped that cherry tree down, when George Washington chopped that cherry tree down. I'm getting to Bush, just a sec. When George Washington chopped that cherry tree down, he took the wood and he built a toolbox. And in that toolbox, he put the powers of the presidency. You know, remember what Washington said, avoid entangling alliances. Why quit our own for foreign battles? So you put each power along the way, and that box has gotten more and more crowded with presidential powers. Today, that box is weighted down with the power to launch a war without declaration, with the power to spy without a warrant, with the power to torture without authorization, with the power to destroy the careers of your political critics, with the power to neglect your responsibility to care for those whose homes and whose livelihoods have been destroyed. All of these powers placed in the box. And I ask you this question: do you really want George Bush and Dick Cheney to be able to hand that toolkit of powers off to the next president, whoever that president is? Be that President Hillary Clinton or Rudy Giuliani. Be that President Barack Obama or Mitt Romney. The bottom line, no president should have the power to bring upon the American people the oppressions that George Bush has brought upon us. Let us say that this is the ending point. This is the day when we, the people, take that toolkit, open it up, and begin to remove the powers, take them out until at the end of the process, it shall be established as Jefferson intended, that the American people ought not fear their president. The president should fear the American people. It is not too late to impeach George Bush. It is not too late to impeach Dick Cheney. It is not too late for the Constitution. It is not too late to redeem the American experiment. Thank you very much.